What if I told you that the man who saved the American Revolution got the job by lying about who he was? Not a small lie either, a total fabrication cooked up by desperate diplomats in Paris about a rank he never held and a friendship with a king he barely knew. And somehow, that lie turned into one of the greatest true stories in American history, because the man behind it walked into a freezing, starving, dying army and turned it into the force that beat the most powerful military on earth. This is the story of a Khan that saved a country. Picture Valley Forge in the winter of 1777. 12,000 soldiers are packed into crude log huts, and hundreds of them are dying every single month. Not from British bullets, but from cold, disease, and starvation. These men do not know how to march together. They can't reload their guns with any real speed. And the bayonets on the end of their muskets are mostly used for one thing: roasting meat over a campfire. Because nobody ever taught them these weapons are for fighting. 18 miles away, in warm houses with full stomachs, the British Army waits, the most disciplined fighting force in the world. George Washington knows exactly what this means. If nothing changes soon, the dream of American independence dies right here in the snow before it ever really begins. What nobody at Valley Forge knew was that the man who would fix all of this was already crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and almost everything about him was fake. His name was Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, and he was born in 1730 in a Prussian fortress town, raised around cannons and soldiers his entire childhood. By 17, he had joined the Prussian army, and by the time the 7 Years' War broke out, he was right in the thick of it, eventually earning a spot on the staff of Frederick the Great, the most feared military mind in Europe. He learned real discipline there, real strategy, real leadership. But when the war ended, the army shrank, and Steuben, now a former captain with nowhere to go, found himself out of a job in a Europe that had stopped needing soldiers. For more than a decade, he wandered from country to country looking for work, taking a humiliating position as a court assistant for a minor German prince, chasing military jobs in Austria, France, and Baden that never came through. By 1777, he was 47 years old, broke and running out of chances. Then he traveled to Paris and reconnected with an old friend who happened to be France's Minister of War, a man who saw an opportunity in this unemployed Prussian officer. He introduced Steuben to two American diplomats trying to recruit help for their revolution, Benjamin Franklin and Silas Deane. And this is where the deception really begins, because Franklin and Deane were tired of European officers showing up begging for high ranks, so someone came up with a plan to make Steuben impossible to ignore. They wrote him a letter calling him a lieutenant general who had served closely with Frederick the Great himself. None of that was true. He had left the Prussian army as a captain, nowhere near a general, and his connection to Frederick was wildly exaggerated. But Franklin understood something important, that Congress would never take a chance on a former captain, while a lieutenant general with royal connections was worth listening to. So Steuben went along with the lie, added a few flourishes of his own about turning down other job offers, and even offered to serve as an unpaid volunteer, only asking for money if America actually won the war. Congress, exhausted by foreign officers demanding paychecks, loved the deal and shipped him straight to Valley Forge. On February 23rd, 1778, Steuben rode into that frozen camp, and Washington personally came out to meet him. Imagine the contrast Starving soldiers wrapped in rags, standing next to this enormous, confident man on a towering horse, wearing a gleaming silver star on his chest, looking every bit like a general, even though the title was invented. One soldier later said he looked like the perfect image of the Roman god of war. Washington was cautious, but intrigued, and within 2 weeks he made Steuben acting inspector general, giving him the job of figuring out exactly how broken this army really was. What Steuben found horrified him. Chaotic camps, no standardized way to march or fire a weapon, and soldiers who genuinely believed a bayonet was only good for cooking dinner. Here is where the story stops being about a lie and starts being about real skill. Because everything Steuben actually knew about running an army was true, and he got to work immediately. He built what he called a model company, 100 hand-picked soldiers he trained personally, every single morning before sunrise, standing in the mud in his full dress uniform. He did something European generals simply did not do. He got his hands dirty, physically adjusting rifles and legs and posture, walking soldiers through marching, loading, and bayonet charges step by step. In the Prussian army, this was basic training. In the Continental Army, it felt like magic. And the wildest part is that he barely spoke any English, so his drills had to be translated overnight from French by his secretary, with help from 2 of Washington's aides, a young Alexander Hamilton among them. When soldiers fumbled the drills, Steuben would explode in German, then French, then turn to his translator and shout for him to come curse at the men in English, because his own vocabulary was not there yet. Instead of resenting him, the soldiers loved it. And that mix of frustration and humor built real camaraderie between a foreign officer and homesick farm boys turned soldiers. The genius of his method was that he never stopped at training 100 men. Those 100 soldiers went back to their own regiments and taught everyone else, creating a chain reaction of skill spreading across the entire camp. Within just 2 months, men who had barely known which end of a musket faced the enemy were marching in tight formation and executing bayonet charges with real precision. Steuben did not stop at drills either. He redesigned the entire camp, moving latrines away from kitchens, creating sanitation standards that cut down disease, and building a system where the best sergeants were responsible for training new recruits. In doing this almost quietly, he created something historians now consider his greatest gift to America: the professional, non-commissioned officer, the backbone of the military that still exists today. By May of 1778, Washington organized a parade expecting the usual sloppy mess, and instead watched his army march with the kind of precision you would expect on a Prussian parade ground. Congress noticed too, and made Steuben Inspector General with the real rank of Major General, meaning the man who arrived with a fake title had now earned an actual one. Then came the real test. The Battle of Monmouth in June of 1778, fought in brutal, near 100-degree heat. For the first time in the war, when the British charged with bayonets, the weapon that had scattered American lines in every previous battle, these soldiers did not break and run. They held their ground and countercharged. A year later, at Stony Point, soldiers trained under Steuben stormed a British fort at night, using nothing but unloaded muskets and bayonets, without firing a single shot, proving beyond doubt that this army could now match the British in the most terrifying kind of close combat that existed. Around the same time, Steuben wrote something even more lasting than any battlefield victory: a training manual known as the Blue Book, the first standardized instruction guide for the entire American army. used officially for the next 35 years.
Steuben served through the rest of the war, sitting on the trial of the spy connected to Benedict Arnold's treason, struggling as a battlefield commander in the South, and eventually commanding a division at the siege of Yorktown, where the British finally surrendered. Afterward, he helped Washington handle one of the hardest jobs of the whole revolution, safely sending thousands of soldiers home. And he even wrote the early ideas that eventually became West Point. In 1784, he became an American citizen by a special act of Congress, the former Prussian con man, now officially one of them. But his final years were far from glamorous. He lived beyond his means, waited years for the pension Congress promised him, and eventually settled quietly on a modest estate in upstate New York, where he died in 1794 at the age of 64, having never married and leaving his land to the two aides he considered family.
Today, his statue stands at Valley Forge, and across from the White House, whole counties and a city carry his name, and communities still celebrate him every September for crossing an ocean to fight for a country that was not originally his own. His rank was invented, his closeness to Frederick the Great was exaggerated, and the letter that got him hired has been called one of the greatest deceptions in American history. But none of that changes what actually happened on that frozen parade ground. A starving, untrained militia turned into the disciplined force that helped win a nation's independence. Sometimes the person who saves everything is the one who had to lie just to get a seat at the table. And Friedrich von Steuben proved that a fake title can still lead to a very real legacy.